This is episode number 20 of the Global Wisdom Talk, and it is my great pleasure and my honor that we have today, on one side, a very important topic, and that's the topic of the Personne de Confiance, or what we are called here in Europe, the consigliere. And on the other side, it's a great honor and it's a great pleasure that I have two of these exceptional individuals here in the talk. On the one side, from Aspen, Colorado, James E.Hughes, and from Switzerland, Kurt Moosmann. Hello to you both, and it would be a pleasure if, before we jump in on our very important topic, that please give the audience just a quick view who you are and who brings you just on this topic as a person de confiance.
Kurt, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, hello, Jan. Thank you very much for the invitation. Obviously, it's a great privilege of sitting here today with someone I truly admire, with E.Hughes. I've been a great fan of his for many years and read all his books, so maybe that has made me a little bit of a better consultant. I don't know. But my career started in financial services up to 2003, working for large institutions in executive roles, and having dealt with entrepreneurial wealth probably since about 95. And then moved into the single family office world in 2004. And since 2009, I joined the world of Elsa Peretti, the famous late jewelry designer who passed away in 2021, initially as an external advisor, as her consigliere, as you just mentioned, as we call it over here. And obviously, Elsa being Italian, she always referred to that. And in 2012, after we renegotiated the Tiffany contract, Elsa had asked me to join the board with the Privy Group, and that's where I am today. After being CEO of the group for a number of years, I retired and became the executive vice chairman of the group, and also co-chair the Nando and Elsa Peretti Foundation, which is a charitable foundation that today holds the entire estate of Elsa. And next to that, I'm honored to be the president of the Swiss Single Family Office Association and sit on the board of a couple of large family holdings, where we basically talk about next generational transitions and how we can basically safeguard the human capital for the future. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what I do.
That's great.
John and Kurt, it's a very rare privilege this morning to be sharing this particular conversation with you. I started as a young lawyer in 1967. Anyone can do the math, discover how many years I've been at this, and in July it will be you can do the math. It's a long time. I am a junior. My father practiced law for 50 years in New York City as an international lawyer. And there were 4 generations of Hugheses before us, going back to the Revolutionary War. Interestingly, we've had judges, we've had no litigators. And my son-in-law is a judge in California, and my new granddaughter is a lawyer for federal government and will someday, I think, be a judge as well. What has interested me in all these years is really social anthropology, social psychology, and evolutionary psychology. None of those sciences existed when I graduated from college, not one. And yet they are the 3 that bear on human groups. So I think I've been an amateur all this time in 3 sciences that bear on the human condition. And what I've seen over those years, and my father epitomized it, is that there are situations where there needs to be someone in a system, particularly a family system, who is outside the family, has a strong affinity for it, but is outside the family, and who serves to make a number one greater than he or she would be. That is the one thing that has been most fascinating to me, I would say, over all these years of wandering all over the world. I would say one other thing, which is not on our agenda today, but I think should be felt and held by our audience. My first great moments in this work were in 1974, where in a very odd trip to Singapore, I came upon the shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve, stable boy to noble to stable boy, a proverb, kimono to kimono, rice paddy to rice paddy. And discovered very soon after that, doing some very serious study, that every culture on earth had the proverb. I thought how fascinating that human beings observing each other, this is the social anthropologist in me, how fascinating human beings observing each other saw this phenomena as long as writing. So why am I extending? Well, I'm extending to just say this much, that what this proverb does is basically explain nothing more and nothing less than the second law of thermodynamics. Oh, what's he talking about? Entropy. Energy, first generation takes energy, makes it matter. Second generation, the matter plateaus. Third generation consumes, and the matter goes back to energy. Now, by the way, that's exactly what Mother Nature wants in this universe, energy to matter to energy. The problem is it's very unpleasant. Pulling apart the bonds of affinity or blood or whatever it is, it's very unpleasant. So what I would say to the audience as we get into this is that what the Personne de Confiance wants to do, and I'm not to the questions, Jen, but I think for Kurt and I to sort of set up is this way. What the Personne de Confiance wants to do is remind the family without being nasty, but rather continuously, you have a choice. The proverb will come true. That's the second law of thermodynamics. It's not going to change this universe. However, you have free will, dear family, as to when.
Right.
That's what we have to keep reminding. So that's been my life.
That's great.
A quiet reminder.
Right. So before we jump in this discussion, and I'm very much look forward, is to clarify what's the purpose of this call today. And the purpose, especially for me and hopefully also for many people and families out there, is to bring more light into this topic, Personne de Confiance. Because we will see so many families over the next decade and 50 years and 100 years that they have become families of wealth with significant wealth. And surprisingly enough, most of these families are coming from nothing. And it is more than ever crucial for the families itself, but also for the society, that these families have an idea or can consider to have these outside individual, the Personne de Confiance or the consigliere, potentially available and just as a guide on this journey. And my first question is, and I will give this just on a short distance to Switzerland, to Kurt. My question is, Kurt, to you. I mean, there are so many myths about these topic or description, consigliere or Personne de Confiance. Some individuals describe themselves as a trusted advisor. What is, from your perspective, the Personne de Confiance, the consigliere? Who is it actually, and also who isn't actually a Personne de Confiance in the consigliere?
I think the way I would describe it is that it's a person that is close enough to act in the interest of the family and to assist the family to overcome any of the issues that it's currently facing, and to be distant enough to remain objective. So the 2 points of bringing clarity and objectivity to the discussions and to the decision makers is one of the key roles. And I always consider myself 75% to be a psychologist and 25% as a technician. If I cannot read the person's mind or understand what the person is saying but not saying, I will not be able to really understand the aim that any of the family members or the principal might have. And I think it's really a role that you are chosen for. You do not walk up to a family to say, I'm your consigliere or personne de confiance or homme d'affaires, and please hire me as such. It is usually the other way around, that you are chosen for various different reasons, be it because you've been a close friend of the family. If you go back to the Medicis, or you go back to the old American industrial families, you'll see that people like the Personne de Confiance have existed, but they've always been chosen by the families. And especially in today's time, where we speak about governments, where we speak about complexities, about mobility of families, about international, I would say, challenges that are stemming from the global macro risk that we're facing, be it from families that are becoming more international. These are topics where basically it is important that the families have a sounding board that really can show up and tell them, or show to them, illustrate to them the key questions that they have to answer prior to embarking on their next journey. And I think the moment where a person becomes too close to either generation, it will be difficult for that very person to act as a bridge builder between the generations. So it is usually important for that person to be respected by the current and the future generation, so that exactly topics that I'm sure we will be touching on will be discussed and moderated in a neutral format, always taking the values and the interests of the family into consideration, because obviously every family is different. And so the person that has been the closest friend of the father very seldom will actually turn out to be a great consigliere to an entire family, because he will always be biased to a certain degree. And the question, that is not to be said that he cannot do it, but the question then always becomes whether the next generation will have him as a sounding board for their problems, and whether he's able to build it.
A great answer on this. And there was automatically in term popping up in my head if you described your story, and I will give you this to you, Jay. That's the topic of the 12-pound gorilla. And what I mean by this is just the ego, right? The ego of the principal, or the ego of the entire family sometimes. How have you deal with egos? They are so large, and I mean, it doesn't make sense to destroy this kind of ego. It's just better to find a pathway to bring this ego outside of the room. And it is just, in many cases, I would say, very, very crucial, because you have on the other side of the table just a very successful entrepreneur, or a very successful family sitting, and they're thinking and considering, in some cases, they are knowing everything, right? Can you give us just an idea, just from your role, how have you dealt with these large egos?
Well, let me pick up the wonderful words that Kurt offered, and then come to that this way. Kurt, I think we could agree that the one thing the Personne de Confiance does is create a culture of care, which is the responsibility of a fiduciary. And I will use the F, a small f, not large f, not some job, but the sense of ever faithful. Fides, the great Latin word fides. So the first thing I think that the Personne de Confiance does is care and teach care at a very, very deep level. The second thing, and I'm going to move to the question of the gorilla in this way. The great work we do, and we'll see if Kurt agrees or not. I believe the great work we do, Jan, as Personne de Confiance, occurs in what the Latin called interregnums, between reigns. All families, because they're in constant transition, I'm coming to it this way, in constant transition, must face times when the king is too old, the queen is too young, the prince is away. These are the natural evolutions of human communities. Again, back to social anthropology.
Yeah.
I think we serve our greatest service when the crab is soft. Who stands in then? Now, let's come to this person that you're mentioning. First of all, I'm going to say something very radical. I believe family begins in the second generation, not the first. I say that because it's that generation that must make joint decisions. And joint decisions are the only way that you have the free will to decide when you avoid the proverb or you don't.
Yes.
Thousands of linked decisions. So all through that interregnum and then the strong hard shell, the Personne de Confiance, the consigliere, stands ready and by, not in, to enable those transitions to succeed, if that's what the family's destiny is. Not its fate, its destiny.
Yeah.
Now, if we come back to this very strong personality, this is going to, I think, shock you both. The best work I ever did in my planning work with first generation people is to say, you know, the greatest threat you have is not estate taxes or the equivalent or creditors, that is your profligate heirs spending your money. No, the great threat you have to your eldest child, which is your business, to be very clear that business is the eldest child, is that you are incapacitated for 10 years. So if you want my help, that's the problem you have to deal with. What? Out, go. And I leave them with either the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley to tell them what's going to happen. The poem is written for them. Or maybe I give them Jeff Sonnenfeld's book, The Hero's Farewell, and say, read the first two chapters. But the greatest work I've done with that generation is really say, suppose you're away for 10 years. What do you want to happen? That's the most important question I think I could ever ask that generation, because that's the problem. Death is easy. It's not pleasant, but things happen. There's a plan. There's action. People can do this. They can do that. There's a continuity. I can't say I've had much success, but I can say that I feel that I have exercised that care question correctly in that circumstance.
Yeah.
By being the fiduciary, that is saying, I think this is where you might put your thoughts.
I think Jay, I think yours, if I may just comment on what Jay said, I think you hit the nail on the head in that respect. Whether you want to call it fiduciary from Fides or as a guardian of the family values, I think that really runs through also the metaphor you used in the beginning, energy to matter, matter to energy. I think our job is to keep the energy level high and that it doesn't go back to matter. I think, and that goes back to a very important aspect, I think, that has been totally neglected. And sometimes people laugh about it when you speak or you allude to it. That is, in order to actually really start discussing with the families what they really want to do and how they want to transition and how this exchange between the one generation and the next should be overcome, and the bigger the family is and the more complex it might be due to any business relationship they might have built into the entire equation, is the human being standing at the crossroad, and understanding, making the person aware what the purpose of life really is. What is his duty to do, and when should you do it? One of the reasons why so many families fail in transitioning across generations, with or without family businesses, is because they don't plan for it, they do it too late, or they are emotionally tied to whatever is that has given them joy throughout their life, like you mentioned, the company being the eldest child. I've had situations where the entrepreneur knew exactly that he had to transition, and the kids were basically crying and begging him to do it, but he couldn't do it because he couldn't let go of his child, because
Yes.
it meant more to him than his physical children. And I think, and the reason I think in hindsight, when you go back to these cases, because usually the cases where you learn the most is where you failed as a consigliere to transition.
Always.
Right. So, and these are the cases where you basically are in a situation where it's really difficult to overcome these emotional barriers. And I think the only solution or possible solution to avoiding these kind of conflicts and damages and hurtful, and I would almost call it an event of duress, is to plan early enough in the stages, way before it came to this situation, so that the people understand that there's a greater good in mind, and that there's a greater purpose that they need to fulfill. And our job is to enlighten them in that aspect, and to also bring complicated questions or difficult questions to the table so that they need to think about them. They don't have to answer them, but have to think about them, because the answer might come over time when we're way out of the room. But that's what we need to trigger. We need to trigger much more important discussions, because the elephant in the room are very often the behavioral components of the individuals dealing with these questions. Maybe that, just in addition to what you rightly pointed out.
Yes.
And Kurt, let me, Jan, if I may, can I
Please.
build on this? Okay. So early in our conversation this morning, Jan used the word wealth. I'd like to be very clear to everyone who's listening. What we mean by that is well-being. We do not mean financial capital.
Right.
I thought, well, I'll get my chance and I'm going to take it right now. Let me make sure it's great right now, because what Kurt just spoke to and I'm speaking to is well-being. The question of the longevity of a family is its well-being. That's its wealth. Now, also, Kurt, in the planning process, coming back to where we started on this question, the very strong personality, the behavior, I can't help, and I won't help actually anybody. Well, I don't do much new at 82, but I can't help even that first generation person at all if he or she will not accept that wealth is well-being.
Mm-hmm.
I can't. We just aren't going to have a meeting of not the minds, the hearts. And also, what I need an awareness in that person, if he or she is willing, to recognize that the thousands of decisions that have to be made from now to 100 years from now, when the third generation is halfway through its life and we can kind of see how the proverb is doing, there are going to be thousands of decisions to be made, big, small, all kinds of them. Can he or she instill into the system that those decisions must be based on whether they enhance the lives of the people making the decisions?
And I think that's exactly perfect. That's perfect.
Yes, not add to the balance sheet at the money side. It may have that effect, but if each decision is not made consciously, does it increase the affinity of us as a community? Which means, does that tend toward the enhancement of our lives? Then Mother Nature wins. But so let me be very clear. There are very few, sadly. I hope there will be enlightenment but awakening is a long-term problem in the world, as Buddha taught us. What I find is that those people who are imagining, who I can help, I can care for them in the right states, care with them, I repeat, are very clear that they can consciously see wealth as well-being, and that they're very clear, not at the expense of their eldest child at all, who is included in this process, but does this decision we're going to make together tend to enhance each other's lives or not? So I'm a bit of a messianic person here on those two requirements.
Yeah,
But if I just may, I mean, if we're allowed to, Jan, I think Jay just alluded to something extremely important, which leads me to the subsequent point. And Jay, I'm curious if you agree with me. Whilst we would be talking about the well-being factor with the current generation, I think it's absolutely key that the generation that is bound to transition into the next will actually bring in the next generation in an early stage so that they actually understand that the responsibility will lie upon them to ensure the well-being on an ongoing basis.
Kurt, yes, and let me say this. Since a family hopes and can hope that all the members of each rising, never the next generation, get rid of that term if it's on your mind, rising generation. That's what the transition is about. That each generation, I believe, Kurt, and your wonderful question, must have a horizontal, that is, its own social compact. The preparation actually isn't for financial literacy or finding your way and your passion. Yes, those are all necessary. The real question is, does the rising generation together, socially, that's a social compact, decide to make joint decisions together for another generation?
yes.
That's a tremendous decision, by the way. But, and this won't surprise any of you, the families that are in their fifth and sixth generation never had anybody tell them that happened. It just happened because they worked really hard to have it happen. They didn't need any books or language. They just saw that the question was each generation in turn, in its transition, must at a certain point decide, are making decisions together to give up some of our individual self toward that process because we're selfish and we think we'll do better as a result of joining in. That's the way it works. That's how human communities do it. But you can prepare. You can prepare.
Yes.
Go ahead.
That goes back to your point of care, right? Because it's basically cross-generational.
Yeah, and if I might repeat this, I hope it's worth repeating. If the plan is to make joint decisions that enhance each other's lives, guess what? Why would you want to leave?
Well, I think this is a real. I would almost want to provocatively add to this. You should have the option to leave.
Of course.
But it should not be made favorable to you, or at least it should be so interesting to you to remain on board. It's like what I had a case of a large family of about 173 beneficiaries in the seventh and eighth generation, where at the end they sold the business and they had a pot of money. And it was clear that the logical consequence initially was that the people just wanted to put their hands into the bucket and take the money and run. And then it was interesting that with a principle, as I like to call it, the principle of the golden cage, you put everybody into a cage and you leave the door a little bit open and you say, well, why don't you stick together in that cage and start to work it out together? And if you want to leave, eventually you can leave once a year at a particular discount, whatever the conditions are. And interestingly enough, that even though you might not like the person standing next to you in the cage, you're still interested and mesmerized by the potential outcome of remaining in the cage. And I think that's the interest factor you want to create.
Yes. And Kurt, that's because there is affinity there.
Right.
Yeah, they may, even if you dislike, there's
Right.
still affinity. And because this is, I'm smiling as the audience can listening, at how subtle the point is that Kurt just made. What is terrible in families, and this again is where the personne de confiance shines, is that someone dies and you have, let's say, 4 children. We may never have that again in the future with a 1.2 demography. Let's say there are 4 children. And let's say 2 of them are stewards. That's so they're worried about the next rising generation, and 2 are inheritors. They're not interested in spending, just interested in control of their own lives. I cannot tell you how many families have died over the argument as to which of those is better. And often the personne d'affaires and many, many people in our field in the behavioral sciences favor the stewards. That fails the objectivity test that Kurt announced 15 minutes ago. Here's the subtlety of what Kurt is offering. If you can understand that both are absolutely healthy psychologically, then you come to a really interesting problem in that cage. Well, I have to find someone else to invest with. I never have enough money myself. Oh, well, I may not like you, but I trust you.
Yeah.
You're trustworthy. I think I'll invest with you. You never need to open the cage door anymore. So the problem is you have a common issue, but you don't see the common issue because you get stuck in the argument.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is where the personne de confiance was subtlety. It's a very important word, not management, not Machiavellian. No, subtlety says, don't you actually have a common investment issue afterward? Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I would like to jump in a little bit in this very brilliant discussion. It's a great joy and a great pleasure. So, can I pick your perspective, your both perspective? If I say, first of all, we need more families in the future, they are becoming just a tribe. I mean, Jay, you have described this very clearly in your books, Family Wealth, and also the compact among generations. And what I've read from your books is this: that if you decide as a family to become just from family to clan to tribe, undoubtedly you need this personne de confiance just on the sideline to guide you, right?
Yes.
You have, let's call it as a beacon. Number 2 is what I see in many cases, and that is just on the point what I've mentioned before we jump in the discussion, is that so many individuals call themselves as a trusted advisor, and they don't have any clue about their own life, right? So for me personally, and you have this also described this clearly in your book, Jay, to become a personne de confiance and take care of others is just your higher calling, and you have found your purpose of life. And it is just crucial. If you don't find your own purpose in life, you can't help others to find their purposes of life, right? What I want to pick up is just in the last couple of minutes, just the outlook from you both. Is there just a clear request of more personne de confiance to help these families on the matter that we will see more families of significant wealth?
Kurt, may I just go first on this one?
Go on. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, let me just say, without giving testimonial, that I had a major midlife crisis. As Dante wrote, at 49, I found myself in a dark wood with no way out. Part of that crisis was because in the first half of my professional life as a personne d'affaires, which I mostly was, I was fulfilling needs. What I didn't realize was I was fulfilling mostly my own economic needs. That's what a personne d'affaires does. They move money from here to here, or whatever it may be. As I came out of that crisis, I was given a gift, and that is that I have never asked since anyone, what do you need? Because it suggests they're needy and I have the answer. I rather devoted my life and have done everything I could to make sure myself that the only question I ever ask is, how can I help? And that has nothing to do with somebody being needing help or being helpless. It is an open heart, an open mind question. That's what the Personne de Confiance lives for. Now, let me add then one thing to this. There will never be as many of these types of people because history is very clear. Being willing to, as a number two, to make someone else a greater number one is a very unusual journey in a life. And here, for those listening who are thinking, I would like to walk that walk, I want to tell you from the bottom of my heart, it is as lonely a profession as anyone ever entered. And I will be there to help you, as will those in the future who play Kurt's and my and Jan's role, because we are lonely. That's why we love doing this together this morning. It resolves our existential ends. So let's be very clear. This is a question of help, never needs, and not one's own needs, but one is fulfilling one's journey doing this work.
Great.
Kurt, over to you.
Well, you saw my two thumbs up.
Thank you.
Jay.
Thank you, my dear
I
friend.
couldn't have put it more eloquently than you did. I would almost become, I don't want to be too biblical about it, but there are, I think, two important caveats, in my opinion, that also have strongly influenced my career as a personne de confiance. Not because I've chosen the path, but because I almost slid into it from the work I did. And people approaching me and asking me questions that had nothing to do with the technical expertise. Because at the end, the personne de confiance has to have the sensitivities to understand the complexities, but he doesn't necessarily have to have the answers to all the questions. Yes, you're right. He has to ask the right questions. There are two important caveats I feel that have really driven my career, and that is, on the one hand side, you have to love yourself first before you can really help others.
Yes.
If you're totally in sync with yourself and you're peaceful and you're at ease, then you have the calmity and you have the tranquility and the perspective, maybe with the luck of having a little bit of experience over all these decades of doing private work, that you will be able to see problems before they really arise, and then you can raise, the light and try to speak to the families about potential issues on the horizon. The second thing is, if someone believes that he still has to prove anything to someone else, he will never be able to actually become a personne de confiance. We typically, and I think I can say that in all honesty, I don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. But what I love to do is to help others and to assist others. And so I think, as we joked around before we actually put on the podcast, was we listen more than we speak. And I think that is key. And if we can really help others to strive and to be able to enhance their well-being over generations and for the rising generations to come, I think that is really what the appreciation is that we get out of our job. And that, I think, has at least been one of my biggest motivations, and I'm passionate about seeing it. And maybe lastly, to add this point, what is fascinating about it, and going back to the anthropologist you mentioned, Jay, is Isn't it fascinating that sometimes when you speak to European families or American families, and you try to use typical instruments of problem-solving mechanisms to overcome a situation, that they will say, "Oh, I have heard of that. I've seen it. It doesn't work." And then all of a sudden, you use exactly the same instrument, but from the Asian culture or from another different culture, which comes in a different color with a different structure, but is exactly the same thing. But the people will actually receive it as something new. And they perceive it to be something completely more modern, and yet they are ready to talk about it.
That's
Yes. So, Jan, I'm going to pick up two things as I was listening to Kurt's very, very clear statements. First, my father, whose name I have, Junior is a complicated thing, by the way. Some of you out there may be juniors and have some sense of what it is to be junior. And you're always junior, by the way. Dad was the greatest living personne de confiance I ever knew. And one day when I was a very young lawyer, I went into his office and I said, "Dad, I have this problem." He said, "Yes, you do." And he said, "Now," he said, "you must learn something." He said, "The purpose of profession appears medical, ministry, high academia, and law, appears to be about providing knowledge." He said, "That is what the person d'affaires do." He said, "Greatness in our world, in the sense of greatness, no hubris, is to provide courage." He said, "I want you to go home and think about your career. Are you prepared to do that?" Oh my goodness, was that extraordinary moment. So if there's one thing, not, and there aren't, there are many as we're exploring this morning of the Personne de Confiance, it is that we are willing to provide courage. Now, let me also say, from a historical standpoint, and Kurt opened the historical kimono here for the moment, let's remember that Nero sent Seneca away to hang himself. Let's remember that Henry VIII cut off the head of Thomas More. Let's remember that the provision of courage is the actual delivery of self, and exactly as Kurt has defined it. This is what is involved. This is not work for children.
right.
And it's not work for people who want to fulfill needs or want to provide knowledge. It's fine. All of those are greatly needed in the world. But if you really want to help a family flourish, and in turn, as Aristotle said, become a part of a flourishing society, then you have to be all in. And you have to care, coming back to what we were saying, you have to be all in, and you have to be willing to say to that gorilla, "By the way, the biggest problem you have is if you're away for 10 years. You want to talk to me about that? How does wealth as well-being feel to you?" Oh, those are, ah, that's courage, isn't it? And I'm not saying that I always have courage. I don't. There are situations where I have stepped back, where I didn't have the courage in that particular situation to go ahead. And Kurt, I didn't consider those failures. I just realized that I wasn't myself up to that particular situation. But I think Dad was right. Go ahead, please.
No. I think you just basically brought another aspect into the discussion I'd like to elaborate on. Maybe two things for the listeners here of today's podcast. Taking someone at the hand and taking him out of the comfort zone is absolutely key. And sometimes, if you do it in a late stage of the process, you will fail in doing it
Yep.
because they're going to be looking at you as their escape artist and they will blame you for not being able to do it. And so, the earlier on you can talk about the comfort zone and the delicacy of actually addressing questions they are not comfortable with in discussing, that's the true essence of bringing problems and behavioral aspects to light, because they are the ones that will actually step in the way in curing whatever the issue is. And what I really like about what you said is also another point, that at the end, if you want to keep energy at an energy level, you have to be open to progress over time. And in order to progress, you have to keep a core element always attached, so that you know that there's a binding element, a binding chain between the rising generation, understanding why they're doing it. And yet you have to also allow for change to happen in a way that it actually is respected. And so I think we also have to maybe very quickly allude, given the time frame that we have, to the fact that there are families, like in one particular case that obviously I mentioned earlier on, I was heavily involved in, where the principal doesn't have any children or isn't married, and all of a sudden stands in a situation to say, okay, I'm 80 years old. What am I going to do with my life now? What am I supposed to do? And it's interesting that very often fear dominates the discussion, because on the one hand side, you want to preserve what you've been able to build, yet you're afraid what the people are going to be doing with it. And then you need to have someone who's able to guide you through the process, so that at the end, when you leave this world onto the next journey, you can go with peace and with the somewhat a notion that others will be taking care of you. And that is an extremely emotional aspect that takes a long time to overcome. And I can assure you that initially the reactions will be, whatever happens to me, it stops the next day. Is that the best way to create or to protect the legacy? No, we know that. But to overcome that fear, that's where a personne de confiance really builds value. That's where, in my opinion, Jay's comment about the social anthropologist and the psychological aspects are absolutely fundamentally key.
Two quick things. One that is difficult, and we're toward the end of our time, but I don't want to be negative. I want rather to be very positive. Some of the greatest work I've done has been the palliative care as the process properly came to rest. Palliative care is a gift to the world. It recognizes that the disease is terminal. The family is going to go its own way. The question, can it go its own way with a party and joy? This is palliative care. And I have been involved in quite a number. So might say, well, that's a failure, Mr. Hughes. No, not at all. Remember, we're dealing with the most natural forces in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And let me also say that when inertia enters the system cold, not fission blowing up or fusion, Mother Nature's rules say that cold will grow. And so one of our greatest work is palliation in the right sense. One of the things that I haven't written about, and I will be, and I'm going to add this very quickly, is that the consigliere or the personne de confiance is also often the judicial branch of family governance. He or she is the elder, when the family doesn't have one or enough yet, who mediates processes so there are never disputes. Again, mediating that great question, I'm coming back to it here. If we make the decision this way, whose lives are we enhancing?
Yeah.
Or not? That's where the mediator, the personne de confiance, a little bit like the deus ex machina in the great Greek plays, enters the system and says, have you considered? That, by the way, was my father's favorite question. Drove me crazy as a child. I never had considered. Of course, it was crazy. That's being a junior. But it's a fabulous question at the right moment. So have you considered, is the mediative way, essentially almost a Taoist way, of entering a conversation without, as you said, Kurt, having an opinion? Now, of course you have an opinion. Of course, you can see that something's going off the rails. But the answer isn't to say, look, you're going off the rails. Oh, no. It's have you considered whether this enhances these people's lives? Huh. That's the artful work that Kurt and Jan and I do, dear audience, to try to help, not fulfill needs, how to help.
I think what Jay just said is absolutely fundamental, because when you think about the fact that we're facing the great transition of wealth right now as we speak,
Yep.
with a gigantic amount of money going into the next generation, most of them will be overwhelmed. And so
Yep.
when you ask yourself exactly that question as to whether the future will be brighter and whether you can be able to enhance the well-being of the rising generations, the sooner you start talking about it, and the consigliere becomes not only a mediator but also a mentor to the next generation, that's when you're in a situation that you're going to be able to build bridges. And funny enough, when I started my career, I didn't have any gray hair, and I always had the difficulty that I had to finally use the first 30 minutes of my discussion to legitimize myself to be in a room with an elderly person to say, what can you tell me that I don't know yet?
Right.
And now at the age of 58, I'm sitting in a room and I need to beg for acceptance from the younger generation that they still listen to me. So in hindsight, I have to say the window of opportunity to be a consigliere is pretty short.
Yeah,
Amen, amen, and amen. John, I think we're at the time. Is that right?
Yeah. So, gentlemen, I was a curious student of you both today. Very much appreciated. It was a blessing, and I've learned a lot, and many thanks that you, Jay, and that you, Kurt, have taken the time to give me and also the audience just a broader view. What is just the Personne de Confiance, and why is this Personne de Confiance or conseiller so crucial and so important for the entire family, not only for one member, for the entire family to flourish and to thrive over generations, because we need these families that they are flourish and they are strong and thrive over generations for us as a society. So many thanks. That was a great pleasure, and hopefully we see us soon. Many thanks.
Gentlemen, it's been a pure joy. Pure joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jan.
Bye-bye.